If you're watching this video, then you want to know about Servlet. So what is a Servlet? A Servlet is a class that handles requests, processes them, and replies back with a response. Although this is a correct definition, I find it very inadequate in explaining what is meant by Servlet. So let me explain. Say this is a client and this is a server, a website or web server. Let's say this client is requesting this website or web server to provide him with, let's say, the home page of the website, the home page. Usually what happens is, because this home page resides on this server right here, what happens is the client gets a feedback, which is the home page requested. But note that this is only possible because the home page resides on this website as what we call a static page. However, if the client makes a request that is a dynamic page or that results in a dynamic page, what happens is there is some runtime because this server needs to generate a dynamic page before it gives the feedback to the client. I'm sure you're wondering what is the difference between a static page and a dynamic page. Let me explain. Static page is a page that is pre-made, designed and stored in a web server. This means that the moment you make a request to the web server, you receive a feedback because this page is readily available on the web server. Let's call this our static page. On the other hand, a dynamic page is a page that is not readily available on the website or web server, which means that the moment you make a request to this web server, what happens is the web server has to generate this page and then feed back to the client or the requester, which is you right here. Let's call this our dynamic page. So for dynamic pages, what normally happens is once the individual or the client requests information on the web server or website, what happens is the website takes the request here and then goes into what we call a pool of data to generate the required information, and then it now processes this thing and makes it into a page designed by the client and then feeds back the client the information. This is what happens in the case of a dynamic page here. So the page is not readily available, so it has to be generated, and this involves obviously some runtime. So that is the difference between a static page and a dynamic page. So based on the explanation, the issue is not requesting a static page because that is easy for the server. Server simply feeds the individual back with the results when they request a static page. But the issue becomes when a dynamic page is requested, what really happens? This is where we find a servlet. Let me explain. So when a client right here is interacting with the server, is our server right here, and the client requests a dynamic page of this server. What happens is this page or this request is received by the server. But because this page is not readily available, it's a dynamic page obviously, it has to be generated. So what happens here? When this request is received right here, the signals are transmitted through what we call an interpreter. And this interpreter is called a deployment descriptor. A deployment descriptor. So what this does is takes these signals here and it does categorize the signals or the request, categorizes the request, and then it, based on this categorization here, it now digs it into what we call a container. and fetches the information that's requested by the client. Now, this container right here, sits right here, is known as a servlet. So this servlet is a component of a server, but is the main component that receives, handles, and processes the request from the client. So the servlet is made up of two components basically that deals with the request. These components include the request component or the request object and the response object. So what happens is this signal or this request goes into or is received by the request object, and then once it is processed, is sent out by the response object back to the client. So this is how information flows in the case of a dynamic page. And this component here, which is like a pool or database from which, the main request is processed and retrieved and responded from, is called a servlet. So that is a servlet. Servlets only communicates based on programming languages like PHP, Ruby, Java. So it doesn't function based on the request that's given by this client here, like normal HTML request for static page. It has to be a programming language like Java, Ruby, PHP, and so many of them there. So that is what the servlet understands and it's coded in. So once it receives the request in Java, for example, it then sends out a response. Now that we understand this description right here, let's redefine servlet. So simply put, a servlet is a server component that handles requests, processes them, and replies back with a response, as we can see right here. So the main word we should focus on here is the fact that it's a component of a server. So that is what we mean by servlet. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.